ideas that become solutions to the world's most pressing concerns. Innovation and creativity are the sparks that ignite to transform lives and society, and these need space to grow.
We are home to these creative and innovative sparks. Our work goes beyond the disciplines, across our 9 faculties, 7 campuses, and being one of Africa's top business schools. As an African global university, we stand proudly among the world's top universities. We remain at the forefront of universal discoveries and provide authentically African solutions to the world's greatest challenges and opportunities. We are pioneers in our fields, from the humanities to cutting-edge technologies, continually seeking ways to improve the world around us. Our hybrid learning systems provide quality education that enables graduates to become adaptable game changers. We have molded nearly 500,000 alumni who have made their mark locally and internationally, and we continue to inspire and equip our students to uphold our firmly rooted culture of excellence. At the heart of what we do is our people. They are creative, critical thinkers who can shape society for the better. Because that is how we teach, learn, innovate, impact, and live. We are the University of Pretoria.
Dear esteemed guests, colleagues and alumni and viewers watching from everywhere, very good evening to you and welcome to tonight's installment of the LeadUP Alumni Thought Leadership Conversation, organized by the University of Pretoria's Alumni Relations Office. The series provides a platform for UP alumni and friends of the university to discuss and influence some of the most important topics facing our country, the continent and the world at this very moment. I am Sebenzile Nkambule. I'm a journalist and a strategic communications practitioner and moderator for this discussion. Tonight's conversation topic is an AI-driven Africa, how artificial intelligence is changing the world we know. Some of the topics we will chat about this evening include AI's ever-increasing integration into our daily existence. What are we giving up in exchange for the seeming ease of a little AI assistance? What happens if AI becomes uncontrollable? And on the flip side, what are the opportunities for South Africa, Africa, and the world at large? Then we'll also look at the question of whether African countries are indeed succeeding in getting the best policy and strategy interventions in place to safeguard data as AI grows in importance. But first, though, before we get stuck into the conversation, allow me to introduce Professor Tawana Kupe, Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Pretoria.
Good evening to everyone joining us tonight, alumni, students, colleagues, members of our extended University of Pretoria community joining us online. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our panel discussion covering the topic, as you just heard, an AI-driven Africa, how artificial intelligence is changing the world we know. Tonight's discussion is the first 2023 installment in our LeadUP Alumni Leadership Conversation series, which was launched under the lockdown conditions of 2020. The aim was to provide a platform for UP alumni and other friends of UP to share expert opinions on some of the pressing issues facing our community. Over the past 3 years and more than 24 panel discussions, we've been pleased to host government ministers, business leaders, and sport and cultural icons, along with other leading UP alumni who work in influential positions behind the scenes. Together, these contributions and conversations help shape the stronger South Africa, Africa, and the world we work to create. Our topic tonight covers a debate that has been and will continue to generate a huge conversation, riddled with almost equal parts fear and excitement. Artificial intelligence, or AI as it is commonly referred to, has taken the world by storm, and Africa is no exception. With the fourth industrial revolution in full swing, it is imperative that we as Africans and a global alumni body explore the potential of AI and how we can use it to solve some of the continent's pressing challenges. AI can revolutionize healthcare by helping to diagnose diseases more accurately and quickly. Additionally, AI can improve access to healthcare for underserved populations, especially in remote areas. In agriculture, AI can help farmers improve the crop yields and reduce the impact of climate change on their crops. In finance, AI can be used to improve access to financial services for individuals and businesses. It can also help prevent fraud and reduce the risk of financial crises. In education, AI can provide personalized learning experiences for students, adapt to their unique needs, and improve student outcomes. However, as much as AI presents opportunities for growth and innovation, it also poses many risks and challenges. The use of AI raises important ethical and social questions, such as how to ensure that AI is used in a way that is fair, transparent, and does not discriminate against any group of people. In light of these challenges, it is important that we engage in meaningful conversations about the role of AI in Africa and how we can ensure that it is used for the greater good. This panel discussion is an opportunity for us to do just that. Our esteemed panelists, proud of them all, come from diverse backgrounds and have deep knowledge about the opportunities, the challenges, and the risks posed by AI. One of the greatest fears about AI is that it will lead to job displacement, as AI systems automate some tasks previously done by humans. We must address this issue head-on and work towards reskilling and upskilling the workforce, if you like, another form of just transition, to adapt to the changing job market. To help achieve this goal, the University of Pretoria launched its Center for the Future of Work a year ago today. The center researches and prepares graduates for the rapidly changing world of work. As the fourth industrial revolution continues to unfold with both disruption and opportunity for innovation, the next generation of workers need to keep pace with breakthroughs in such fields as robotics, nanotechnology, the Internet of Things, quantum computing, and biotechnology. The Center for the Future of Work at UP aims to advance the knowledge field of the future of work, preparing the next generation of motivated, successful employees for the benefit of our country, South Africa, our continent, Africa, and the world we are a part of. As alumni and friends of the University of Pretoria, you too have a crucial role to play in shaping the direction of AI in Africa. You can use your influence and expertise to ensure that AI is developed and used in ways that benefits all Africans. You can help address the ethical and social concerns surrounding AI and work towards creating an inclusive and equitable future. I'm honored to preside over such an important conversation that brings together experts from different fields to discuss a topic that is crucial for the development of our continent. Of course, as Vice Chancellor and Principal, I also take great pride in the background info provided by our sterling alumni relations team, which organized this event. I'm told that our original panelist list, and including our moderator, hold at least 6 UP degrees or diplomas between them. No one can beat that, I can tell you now. I must also boast especially of Professor Wesley Roslyn Smith, Rector of the Center for the Future of Work here at UP, who at last count is a 4-time UP alumnus. He can't get enough. I'm confident their shared contribution to this topic will further reinforce the world-class quality of the graduates produced here at the University of Pretoria. We just graduated 12,000 in the last month. In conclusion, I want to thank you panelists for joining us today and for sharing your knowledge and expertise. Also want to thank you, our alumni and wider UP community, for taking the time to join us for this important conversation. Let us work together to ensure that AI is used for the greater good and contributes to the progress and prosperity of our country, our continent, and the world we are a part of.
Thank you very much, Professor Coupe, for your welcome and insight. Of course, this event is brought to you by the University of Pretoria's Alumni Relations Office, and among our panelists tonight, we have an exciting mix of UP alumni, UP staff members, and friends of the university. Let me now present the panelists to you. I'll start with Dr. Maki Yankees, who is Telkom's Group Head for Innovation and Transformation, and a computer scientist who is passionate about the role that technology innovations can play in improving society. Let me also welcome Professor Vugosi Marivate, who is UP's APSA Chair of Data Science and works on developing machine learning and AI methods to extract insights from data, especially in the area of natural language processing. Let's also welcome Professor Wesley Roslin Smith, who is the Director of the Center for the Future of Work here at the university and an Associate Professor of Corporate Strategy, Turnaround Management and Business Analytics. He is a leading expert in the field of business turnaround strategy and is involved in various digital transformation initiatives. And lastly, we're also privileged to be joined by Professor Alta van der Merwe, who is the Deputy Dean of UP's Faculty of Engineering, Built Environment and IT, and a former head of the Department of Informatics. We welcome our expert panelists and thank you very much for your time with us this evening, availing yourselves to share your thoughts on this topic with us. And before we jump in, we ask those who are watching online, who'd like, of course, to join in the discussion, to please use the hashtag LeadUPConversation when you are posting about the event. And a very good evening to all of my panelists. Thank you for joining us in person. I can indeed confirm that it is our panelists and not AI-generated versions of our guests. All right, so to kick us off, just as the first round of comments and introductory remarks, through the lens of your specific area of focus and expertise, give us a sense of in your view, where you think this conversation is. And I'll invite Professor Roslin to kick us off here, just your high-level remarks, what's top of mind, as of course we speak about an AI-driven Africa.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to take very much a future of work perspective. As we're not, from a future work perspective, we're not as interested in the underlying technology behind AI, but rather how the technology is fundamentally transforming the nature of work. Its potential implications for Africa are immense, both in terms of opportunities and challenges. Now, in the context of AI and the future of work, these disparities present a dual challenge, ensuring that all African countries can benefit from AI and, on the other hand, preventing further inequalities from actually widening. On the opportunity side, there are numerous opportunities that we can look at. However, two really stand out. The first, in the education space. We can see that AI can dramatically enhance the accessibility and quality of education on the continent. Furthermore, it can provide personalized learning and tailored approach to the individual's needs. The second opportunity I want to highlight is that of economic diversification. Now, many African countries rely heavily on few sectors economically, such as agriculture, mining, and oil. However, AI can facilitate the growth of new industries, such as technology, financial services, and the creative arts. Africa has the youngest population in the world and is ripe to take on those opportunities. Having said that, though, there are challenges. Our VC highlighted that job displacement is a risk involved. However, with the threat of job displacement, there are the potential to create numerous jobs as well. The second challenge I want to highlight as a starting point is that of the digital divide. Seeing as we are talking about an African context tonight, what we need to look at the benefits of AI for the continent and the threat in the context of the digital divide as well needs to be considered. In conclusion, I think we need to be cognizant that AI has a tremendous opportunity for Africa to leapfrog stages of development, but it is not without its challenges. It requires a strategic and thoughtful and inclusive approach.
Thank you very much, Professor Roslyn Smith. Let me invite now Dr. Maki Yankees to share your opening remarks on the state and the impact of AI on the continent.
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this panel. Always a pleasure to be at my alma mater. I think for me, there's great perspectives from an economic growth perspective. If I look at just the sector that I'm in, the telco sector, there's a lot of opportunities on how we can improve business as a whole in growth and obviously contribution towards the economy. So in the telco sector, we can think about automated fault detection, which improves the experience of our customers on how they experience our telco. But something which is quite personal to me is the education sector. What are the possibilities in terms of impact on society? If we look at South Africa, many of the children, when they go into school, they're not English first language speakers. Dominatively learning content is in English. And there has been several studies from education experts that has shown how many children move and switch between languages to better understand, particularly mathematics and science. It's wonderful to see that AI is catching up, or machine learning, depending on what you want to call it, is catching up in having language translated much better for young learners to be able to understand learning content available in their own languages, and one day hopefully be able to support the technique that is quite unique for us as South Africans of code switching. So there's a lot of sectors that we see a lot of possibilities on, but I think what's important for me is the levers that can enable AI to move forward. That can happen through partnerships such as funding and partnerships between research institutions, private sector, and other key stakeholders such as government.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jantjies. Professor Marivate, let me welcome you to the discussion as well. Just before we went live, you were sharing with your fellow panelists that you've just come back from Kigali, Rwanda. You certainly have your finger on the pulse of developments in this field. Perhaps you want to just touch on some of the key takeaways from that experience and, of course, your high-level introductory remarks.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And it's great to also be here with all the great panelists. I think in thinking about AI and the African continent, we need to think very broad as opposed to very specific of maybe some of the developments that have happened over the last year or so. We, on one side, automated decision-making tools have been with us for a long period of time. If you interact with the internet in one way or another, you have systems that are making decisions about you and then showing you content that they think that you want to see. And what's important then is saying what are the values that are imbued in these kind of systems and which direction are they actually going? So it's very important for us as Africans to be part of those conversations. You can't be on the sidelines, and you can't just be a person, a population that just takes the technologies without actually shaping how they are. So here at the university, I lead a research group called Data Science for Social Impact, and we work mostly, especially in AI and languages, and especially African languages, building new tools, finding ways to extract data, and finding innovations within those spaces. The other part is touching on things like education and health. How do we apply this in areas that really they could make a big impact, and then also make sure that they're useful for those people, right? And they can be used by people who are not us, who are not researchers within these spaces. On the conference this year called the International Conference of Learning Representations. On one, it was a milestone. This is the first time such a large or prestigious AI conference is actually held on the African continent. I was one of the program chairs, and we spent over the last year preparing for this. Initially, we were supposed to have this conference in Addis Ababa in 2020, but because of the pandemic, it moved online. When I say milestone is by the time such a conference comes to the continent, we had been building grassroots AI across the continent for almost a decade. You have organizations like the Deep Learning Endowment, Data Science Africa, Data Science Network that identified a long time ago that we have a lot of young people on the continent. They're very, very excited and want to learn about AI and use it within their daily lives. And they were finding that industry and even academia weren't moving as fast as what was actually required. So these grassroots AI movements on the continent brought in these huge networks and allowed people to now be able to research, do development, and work together. That by the time this conference is coming to Kigali, if we look back at the 2019 numbers, I think we had about 16 people out of this conference that typically has 2,000 to 3,000 people saying they came from the African continent. And this year in Kigali, that number had gone up to 291. Sure. Right? So it wasn't people just saying, I'm going to sit and listen. It's active participants that were showing off their work. They were debating. They were like, occupying the space within there. We don't want to, as I said, like if we were just sitting on the sidelines, it doesn't like, you don't want the conference to come to the African continent and it just be an exotic destination. You want us to actually be actively within there. There's still more to do. There's still more to do, and I hope such discussions get people to understand these technologies are not magic, and we also have, a say in how they actually get built, and we should really be very assertive about this.
Yeah. In a moment, we'll invite you to speak about what that more that we need to do is. But let me welcome Professor Alta van der Merwe to the conversation as well. A very good evening to you, Prof. Your opening remarks.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have to say I'm very privileged to be here between such esteemed members. For me, I'm from the original from the informatics department, and I'm not so much into the technical stuff. I'm more into the person stuff. What are we? How do we align? And you all might know me from Society 5.0, which is one of my passions, where it's about technology and people, and how do we interact with technology and how do we advance people. But all said, you spoke about education. For me, it is amazing the opportunity that we have that arises now for education. From two perspectives. For the student, I think the fact that you now, if you think about Bloom's Sigma's theory, where he says that if you have one-on-one tutoring, that you will get twice the result that you will get in a classroom of 30 people. So now with generative AI, you have the opportunity to have your own tutor always 24 hours if you don't misuse it or don't use it in the wrong way. Yeah. From the lecturer side, always have a personal assistant. So all of these things are things that I'm very interested in, that I love working with. The challenges that we now have as a university, how are we going to address this? How are we going to use all this AI, and how are we going to adapt to that? So that is my background. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Professor. Let me come back to you, Professor Marivate, to speak perhaps more on the more that you said needs in fact to be done, but also perhaps underscore the question around African languages, which often are left behind, which also contribute to perhaps lesser learning outcomes compared, comparatively to peers across the world. How, in fact, is this new technology democratizing, if you will, the use and impact of tech through language inclusivity on the continent?
Yeah, so one, we mustn't take it for granted that just because we're seeing language models, these systems that now are doing generative text, that it means that they also cover our languages. That is not something that just happens. At the moment, the very popular systems do very badly in our languages. I think the OpenAI system does have in it some isiZulu that was trained on, but it makes very basic mistakes. And as such, it's if you're thinking about it using for translation, it's not something that you should be. Why do we work on AI in language, and especially for our languages? Language is more than just symbols, right? It is not just a thing where you're just saying, or you're putting a word next to another. We communicate, we share ideas, we have our histories, our cultures that we tend to say can't even be translated. But what you try to do is build systems that then try to process this language where it is so that we can better understand ourselves, right? That's the pursuit of science. So when in our lab, the reason that we work on African languages is that we find that we need to be counted. We need to come up with the tools that allow people to find it to be very comfortable in navigating the world in their language, seeing themselves on the internet, as opposed to always having to change, right? And then think in a way that might not really reflect them. And this is something that we're going to be facing more and more, as it just becomes a little bit easier every day to just say, we will move towards a dominant English. But what do we leave on the table? right? We are not going to be able to explain some of the phenomena that might be happening in Limpopo, where people who might be coming in an area that is a mix of Sepedi and Slubedu, right? And if we do that, then we're going to have to, sometime in the future, rediscover.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like some of these other items. So these tools need to be there, need to be built, and this requires that we then build them. They're not going to necessarily be built by people from outside because they don't have that context. They're not people who actually speak that language on a day-to-day basis. And that's why there's a big movement in what we call low-resource languages to build up the capacity, even on the African continent. We have a grassroots AI movement called Masakane that we formed in 2019 that now has over 2,500 researchers who work on African languages, and almost every month, breakthrough research is coming out, showing how great, the great tools, the great innovations that can come from such a community, and that's just actually then trying to teach the rest of the world within these spaces.
So these challenges aren't necessarily insurmountable. You just need to be aware of the context. There are hundreds of languages on the continent. Case in point, the most recent issue with the new bills in the country, right? And spelling. So it's quite complex, and that might be a reason why perhaps some folks may want to then abandon this cause. You arguing, be aware of the context, but still, of course, push on.
Yeah, I like. There's been this argument like, oh, why? Sometimes I get this question, and sorry, Maki, from industry people of like, why work on these languages? We could just work on and you're like, no, like we can't be making decisions, for whole parts of our communities just because it's not easy to do. We do it because it's hard, right? And we're going to learn through doing this. And when we unlock, the thing is, the reason I say we think about the context is that you take care, right? If it's your language, the whole controversy about the N, I'm Tsonga, right? So watching that has been very interesting because you see linguists on one side, you see people who come from communities trying to then say there's a debate here, and then on our side, I come as a computer scientist, go like, I find language where it is, right? And it's very interesting because a linguist will say, no, there's these rules that have to be, and then other people will say, no, but that's not how on our day-to-day we live with this language. And I was like, how do we process this so that we can learn from both of these sides? So it needs that care. It needs people knowing that, oh, I can identify that if I'm in, I think this was happening over the last week about Zulu Sotho, right? That context of Zulu Sotho, of saying like, yes, like for some people, it makes sense. Yeah. If you're in KwaZulu-Natal, depending on where you are, the language changes.
Correct.
Right, and yeah.
Dr. Yankee, let me perhaps invite you on that point as well. For industry, how important is this question around diversity and, of course, appreciating nuance on the continent, appreciating, of course, the diversity that also, I think, contributes to what's developed on the continent, to how useful it is, how impactful it is for the people on the continent?
Well, diversity is important for any organization because if you're representative of the country that you serve, then it means that you're representative of the customer base that you have. So diversity, let's start there. It's important for any organization. And holding your customers or society at heart is what makes any company successful. I think a recent report from the South African Science and Technology Indicators sadly reflected on the reduction of R&D funding in South Africa as a whole. And why I emphasize this is because one of the things I advocate for in industry is continuous funding towards R&D. Because for the growth of this to happen, it has to be funding and resources and support that comes from all sectors. A big challenge that we also have is a brain drain. So you have wonderful experts. I'm glad people such as Vokosi remain on the continent, but we need to keep environments that enable people with these skills to stay in South Africa and in the continent. Reason being, they understand the context in which they're developing this technology for. They're able to come up with AI challenges that serve the South African and African community as a whole. So I think it's quite important for all industries across sectors within the continent to partner as much and as effectively as possible potential to create an enabling ecosystem. What was interesting in the report was that there was an increase in venture capital funding to startups that were working on innovative areas such as this. So it's great to see that some money is going to startups and the SMME sector as a whole towards strengthening the ecosystem, but it's not enough, and we should, and we are moving forward to doing more to enable the ecosystem to grow.
Why is it not enough, do you think? Why is there the hesitancy?
Yeah, I think silo working, and I think we're always engaging with key stakeholders, not just within industry, but across, to create environments that make it easy for business to work with stakeholders, for universities to work with businesses, and society and government as well. So if we have policies in an enabling environment that enables that movement and cross-collaboration, multidisciplinary investments and work, it's quite important. So it's quite important that the university speak to business, business speaks to the university, and they find a middle ground to ensure that we move holistically as a country forward our innovation ambitions, which is how great countries were able to move in one generation, such as Singapore, such as South Korea. It was through those partnerships across sectors that moved the dial in key areas. So if we want to make a dent, which is contextual, especially in AI, and we see all the developments of generative AI, we need to do that within the South African context and Africa as a whole.
Professor Rosalind Smith, coming back to livelihoods, the impact on the economy, are fears of AI taking over jobs and threatening livelihoods justified?
Okay, yes, it's real and it's justified. I think the recent World Economic Forum's report on the future of jobs said that in the next 5 years, 83 million jobs are going to be projected to be lost, and 69 million are projected to be created. So let's look historically for a moment. Every technological revolution has displaced certain types of work. The invention of the steam engine, the assembly line, and more recently the computer all resulted in significant shifts in the labor market. AI automation are expected to have a similar impact going forward. Now, jobs that involve repetitive tasks, routine data analysis, and certain customer service roles are at high risk of automation. But technological revolutions also create new jobs and industries that we can't fully anticipate today. For example, the rise of the internet led to the creation of entirely new industries that weren't even conceivable a few decades ago, such as e-commerce, social media, and even app development. Now, the demand for AI and learning specialists in this field, of course you would know, is growing rapidly. In fact, we expect it to grow about 40% in the next year. That's 1 million jobs, as the usage of AI and machine learning drives continued industry transformation. So really the question we need to be asking ourselves is, how do we move forward with this? And I would say caution. We need to think strategically and invest in our growth capacity. Where we can upskill, we need to motivate and assist employees to do so. Where we need to retrench, let's create social safety nets for those people. And then where we need to hire, let's ensure that our education system is able to develop those sort of professionals.
Thanks, Prof. Professor van der Merwe, in late 2022, OpenAI's ChatGPT grabbed, of course, global attention. The tool is revolutionizing the art of the spoken and the written word. In terms of academia, what are perhaps some of the ethical implications on scholarship and academia? But also, how can this be managed to augment learning and preserve the integrity of scholarly achievement?
Okay, so there's two sides to the question. Firstly, the ethical. Of course, the models are built based on existing information, existing books, existing journals, existing resources. So without meaning, I don't think it is with meaning, it might happen that the resources are misused and that students that's going to use those resources will plagiarize them without really realizing that they are doing it. Then there's, of course, the data bias. You spoke about the data biases as well. The models are trained maybe in a Eurocentric or an American perspective, and that might have a bias at the end of the day. And then, of course, the dependency. Students can become dependent on the use of generative AI and not to think critically themselves anymore. How will we manage that? Well, regulation. We will have to think how we're going to regulate all of this. We will have to do training. We will have to educate our students. And I think we also have to work with people that generate and that use these platforms, like Vicorsi and those developers that is involved in those kinds of initiatives.
How seamless a process do you imagine that will be? Because it seems as though the turnaround is so short. We're just talking about end of 2022, and there are all of these other bots as well that are emerging. So it's a very dynamic environment. Can the learning environment keep up?
I'm very concerned about that because we've just seen at the University of Pretoria, we immediately got, and Prof. Ferris and the team got some guidelines going, and that helped a lot. But the policies always take a lot of time. So yes, the question is, by the time that we've got the policies, are they not going to be outdated? Are they not going to be, we spoke about the fact that Microsoft is going to have within their tools integrated the whole generative AI abilities. Well, by the time that happens, how are we going to manage that? So yes, you are right, it is going to be a challenge.
Dr. Jantjies, let me bring you back into the conversation, again speaking about resourcing, innovation, what you already, I think in your previous responses, spoke to what some of the challenges are there. There is often the expectation that the larger economies on the continent should be leading, should be driving this. South Africa, Nigeria. Once upon a time, Egypt was certainly leading in terms of being one of the largest economies on the continent. Is that in fact what is happening? Or are we seeing perhaps other countries playing a far greater role? What can perhaps a country like South Africa learn from those other players?
I think that the challenges across the African continent differ, right? There's a clip that goes around, that is going around of the former President Thabo Mbeki speaking to the President of Mali about building a library in Timbuktu. That talks about the great history and archiving. And he said to him, if you can help me with water for people, because my people need water, please go build a library, right? So in essence saying that, look, I have to make trade-offs. It's beautiful. I need to archive all this beautiful history, but there are these trade-offs that we need to make as a country because the basics of people speaking to poverty and the challenges that people face also need to be met. But it's great to see some of the work that goes into organizations such as Masakane that brings together these different groupings across the continent. It's great to see also funders supporting those initiatives that move across countries. So then you don't have a domination of just South African influence over the area, because I think it's quite important that we have diverse views and representation from experts within the continent to move the dial forward. And I think South Africa has done significantly quite well within this investment, within the AI field. We've seen commissions on 4IR, coming out with results on establishing hubs that are specific to AI. And there's a lot of research with people such as Professor Marivate that goes into this. There's also a lot of industry output that is coming. We ourselves have got translation teams working on that particular area. So industry is also investing quite a lot. But for us to make a significant impact, I think it's the cross-collaboration across the continent and organizations such as Masakane and many other organizations that are cross-border, focusing on AI for the continent are quite important for us to continue supporting and working with closely.
And do you, in your experience, are you finding that the policy-making environment is agile to meet the demands and the requirements?
Well, I guess it depends who you're speaking to. If you're speaking to business, it would have a different perspective. If you're speaking to government, it would have a different perspective. But I think as a continent, you'd have the challenge of sometimes we have really great policies. The speed at which we're able to respond or implementation sometimes can differ from one place to the other. But it's important that I think from an operational perspective, we have a long-term view of where we want to be as a continent in terms of this conversation. I think that's quite important to say. As much as we have all these policies that we are coming up with, we need a shared vision of us as a continent on where we want to move when it comes to this. So I think it's great to see that we have interventions that are moving across board, and the shared vision needs to be continued within that context.
Professor Rosalind Smith, again, going back on the focus on, the impact of AI on business, perhaps let's speak a bit about the impact on labor and productivity, sort of trends that we're likely to see or are already seeing.
Yes, okay, so I think we can't obviously predict the full extent of the impact on technology will have, but we can observe what businesses how businesses deploying generative AI already and get a glimpse into what's about to come. So this all hinges firstly on South Africa and Africa's ability to harness this type of technology and deploy it effectively in business. So we need the skills, we need the capabilities to reside here on the continent for us to take advantage of this. Having said that, though, there are multiple possibilities for this technology. I'm just going to highlight just a few. Firstly, I think business models are going to be at the core struck by this technology. Some businesses are going to be fundamentally changed. Others are going to leverage this technology in terms of competitive advantage, so long as that can last. But it is going to be intertwined with the concept of dynamic capabilities, how companies are able to take this technology and what parts of their labor force can actually utilize this to improve productivity. Second to that, I think we should be looking at skills around or the ability that AI has to improve data analysis and decision making. This will help us a lot for people that don't have statistical or data science backgrounds to harness the skills, the insights of prescriptive and predictive analytics. So that's going to improve a lot there. A big field that's going to improve quite a lot, I estimate, is customer experience. We're going to see a lot more personalized customer experience emerging out here. Already there are talks about receiving your news article written in a form that's personalized just to you. Mm-hmm. Take that to other business models like those that rely heavily on differentiation. I see a lot of disruption happening in that regard. We've spoken a little bit around labor and the displacement of jobs, and also around, we should also just highlight the areas of work transformation. The event of virtual assistants, we're already seeing high integration of these tools into work products such as Gmail and Outlook, which are improving our ability to respond faster, and that's also going to change things.
Mm-hmm. Prof. Alter, perhaps if you could speak a bit to intellectual property and other infringements, in fact, on copyright here. How can content creators be protected?
If you allow me, I'm going to, for this question specifically, talk about the model that Sarah Elaine Eaton has presented it earlier in this year, where she said, where she predicts and talks about what we need to think about when we are talking about policy making, learners, intellectual property, and so on. The first thing is the hybrid human AI writing will become normal. It will integrate, us and computers will integrate with one another, and it will be normal that we do it in this way. The human creativity, she predicts that will be enhanced. Talking to generative AI and interacting with it will enhance your ability to be creative. Language barriers will disappear, hopefully, Prof. Maravati. Then what will happen is that humans will still be responsible for the content. We have to remember that. So with intellectual property, you have to remember that even though you can give control to AI and you can give power that they write stuff for you, you still have to acknowledge it then also. That is a fifth tenet. And then the sixth one is that we will have to redefine the concepts of plagiarizing. And how are we going to look at that, and what will be the new ways that we look at this? Or are we going to try to stop this? How are we going to interact with that?
Mm-hmm. It also again sounds as though it can be incredibly tricky. In an age of social media, everybody's walking around with multiple devices. You take a picture, you post it. What sort of things need to be in place to ensure that you're able to, take it back to the source, attribute the original holder of that particular property?
I think that comes back to what I've said in the beginning. I don't think we're going to keep that control. I think we're going to lose that control. We're not going to be able to intellectual property, and that's why I say we will have to redefine how we look at plagiarism, because it's not going to stay the same as it is today. We will, yes, of course, we still need to reference if we know that we are using people's stuff. But it becomes so emerged that sometimes you won't even know you are using something.
Professor Marivate, given the rate of change in the field and the scale of need in terms of development on the continent, can we keep up and create the tools that support society, importantly, deepen democracy, and bridge these divides on the continent that persist?
Yeah, that's a very loaded question in this case, but I'll attempt in some ways to think about it from the perspective of also tying it back to the previous, I think, the questions that have just come to the rest of the panelists. At the moment, to really navigate within this space, you need to understand, not just, yes, as an academic, not just as a person in industry, not just as a person, let's say, within a government perspective. You need to know really how all of these link up, because we don't have that luxury to just say, I will sit on one slice and just think about it in that way. If we really want to make sure that Africa, we don't want to just be a source of data, where we're providing all these large companies with data and then they're crunching it and then they sell us new services. And we're not doing the beneficiation. It's almost the same way people want to say data's the new oil, but a lot of, developing countries see that in a very different way.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of others. So we need to play within these spaces. When it comes to policy, Maki is right. There's this thing of building up policy and it taking a long time. The AU has been working on policies that have to do with data. Last year, they launched the data policy framework, right? And one way is to allow other countries to be able to look at it and say, here's how we can actually use this to build up our own data policies. I've been working over the last year with other colleagues across the continent on the AI policy for the continent. Right? It takes a long time. It's a very different process, much, much slower. But we know it's important to have it there, because if you don't have data governance, it becomes this very Wild West that now when we think about the future of work, people are not protected. For AI systems to work, right, they need to be taught with data. This data needs to be enhanced by people. And some of this might be information that is really bad. Right, there might be images that people shouldn't be seeing. So you need to have, for the reason that you might be on a social media site and you never see horrific images, it means that there's some system in there that's actually sorting and removing and filtering. But to do that, a human has to first teach that system. Mm-hmm. So a thing that just happened over the last 2 weeks or so is that in Kenya, workers who work on these in these what we call annotation companies have actually unionized. Right, and now are also suing some of these social media companies because they had created very hostile work environments and not provided enough protections for them. And the reason that this became very big is that for these companies, they were moving these jobs to where they thought it was just cheap labor and with less regulations. Right, they don't do it in their countries, but it's okay to have these same things happening in these other countries on there. So these things then require that we have proper governance, have proper policies that work within there. So that's just one of saying why you need to then work within there. Then yes, you have to build up a lot of skill to be able to do the work here. And we also have to have the belief that we can do the work here. At the moment, a lot of the way some of maybe industry and even funders for R&D still fund most of this to be work on Africa, but then funding the West to do it, right? And this then does not capacitate Africans to actually do the work. Mm-hmm. It just becomes almost very paternalistic. You're going to work with a Western partner who will help you do the work, and then you never ever get the agency. And this then also really impedes the progress going into the future. The other is then to, instead of looking at saying that, yes, Africa is very diverse, we need to leverage on each other's strengths. If South Africa is very much financialized, we have very good banking systems and all those things, let's work then that can actually be used on there. If it's much easier, in some cases that you find Kenya, like, hopefully South Africa Home Affairs doesn't throw rotten tomatoes at me. When it comes to this, a lot of the large research labs in the world are setting up in Kenya.
Sure.
Right, in AI. It's a very dynamic market now if you go if you go to Nairobi. Right, Microsoft is there, Google just got there. More and more are coming on there, and you go see that, and then you ask them, like, why are you setting up there and not in South Africa? Right, those things, but then you find out, oh, there's a market, there's a different way that thing. Lagos, you're thinking about Accra. All these places provide different views, and we could then say, okay, then let's leverage them. Let's find ways that it's easy to move between and be able to leverage the strengths that each of those have, as opposed to just really, like, abiding by these things that were drawn by people who are not even us. Right, these borders, yeah. But anyway, yeah.
There's several questions that are coming in from our audience, which is fantastic. I'll get to those in just a moment. But perhaps for the panel again, when you have leading figures in AI coming out and wanting to throw caution, where there's, again, going back to the ethics, whether if we'll ever be at a place where somebody can ask a bot, how do I make a bomb, or how do I influence elections? The US, they go to the polls in 2024. South Africa goes to the polls in 2024. There's an element of fear as well, I think, in addition to the exciting bits that you've all spoken to in different ways. Would you throw caution as well, just about how perhaps unsafe we may be as humans if this does in fact become uncontrollable? Prof, am I right to put you on the spot?
I like using examples. So we worked with the CSIR, Media Monitoring Africa, in 2021 to try and collect some data, especially about misinformation and disinformation during the elections. And looking at now what's happened since then with generative AI, one being in image generation, then now text, and audio and video, there's a big concern about next year's election in South Africa. There's going to be likely a deluge of very personalized misinformation. And this is where now it really touches on the hearts and minds of people and can affect things. And this is now coupled also with, for a lot of the social media platforms, they will say, oh, you are an African country, and we are not based in your country, and as such, you don't have any power to tell us to remove content. In the US, when they have an election, your Facebooks, your Twitters have whole war rooms that they set up to make sure that they fight misinformation, not for us. Right? And that shows you that if you don't have the policies, you then don't have the power. And even if now it leads to, in some cases, that's been shown, genocide in Myanmar, where it was driven by some of these platforms, nothing is done because they're like, nope, we will not actually abide by these things. So these systems at the moment, there is danger, but then it goes back to fundamentals. What are our own regulations when it comes to to the basic internet technologies, and how do we then make sure that people abide by our rules? We can't be saying like, no, the industry will come and write our policies for us. They will do the least work that it requires them for them to just keep on making their profits.
Yeah. Any other takers on that before I take our audience questions?
I'll chip in just to say that, it's not a vulnerability that has just come about, recently. Yeah. We've been exposed to this vulnerability, for quite some time. It stems deeper than just the ability of generating, content through newer technologies like AI. It's our ability to discern truth from lies and look at things more critically and understand these arguments more clearly. That's really where it lies. And yes, I think AI is going to take that to a different level. And I think huge chunks of South Africa are extremely vulnerable in this sense. and we should be cognizant of that, especially entering 2024.
Absolutely. Several questions coming in. Many of them aren't, in fact, directed to any particular panelist, so I'll do the honors and choose. The first asks, how can we benefit from AI when data is still one of the most expensive in South Africa compared to other parts of the world? Fantastic question. Dr. Yankees, that one was for you.
A pertinent, very important question, and I emphasized throughout the panel discussion the ecosystem. I think first things first, to put down infrastructure when it comes to telcos is often the responsibility of the telco company involved, right? And I won't say the name, but the company is probably one of the lowest data provider plans within South Africa. But I think there's a broad question on a digital divide challenge that we continuously contributing towards. Intervention that I will speak about is that, for example, in our organizations, we've got interventions that range from primary school to high school to postgraduate funding. So we fund interventions in improving maths and science within schools to enable access to skills, take those very students, give them bursaries, and undergraduate gives them internships, go to postgraduate and have research topics in areas that are specific to the organization and support students. So right from primary school all the way to PhD, right? And then we have programs that enable them to come into the company. We've got programs that also support startups and SMMEs within the sector. So I think what's important is a holistic view about the ecosystem, which enables the reduction of price in different areas. But it's a very important question on saying that before we even talk about generative AI, how do we ensure a reduction in the digital divide, in all the levers that can ensure that every single South African is a key player within the digital economy and can contribute and play a role within the sector?
I can't help but bring up, just yesterday I think it was, reports about our declining learning outcomes where fourth graders and their reading levels, being the worst in the world. So we have an issue like that, for example, right? The ability of fourth graders in the country being able to read and read for meaning. And here we are speaking about generative AI. Comment on that, please. And perhaps Prof. Ndemerva, a comment from you too as well on that.
Well, I guess the conversation, before we even talk about AI, and the data divide that still exists within our economies is something which is quite important, and education is our first lever. So we can't talk about interventions in the sector as a whole if we're not talking about basic education interventions. And there's been quite a lot of interventions in even in our organization, especially for science and mathematics, and psychosocial support, and support that ensures that there's a good performance of learners that go through the pipeline and actually end up in higher education and have a chance and an opportunity to go into the fields in the sector. So I think before we can talk about the wonderful opportunities that the generative AI technologies bring with us, ensuring that we give good services to our customers, the very same customers need to have power behind them that enables them to access the digital economy.
Prof?
Okay, yeah, it's a difficult question. For me, my blood is O positive. So I have a colleague, Marie Hutting, that always says that means you're always positive. So for me, I just see the potential. I just see the amazing potential that we have to reach many people with information. Yes, it might be that some of the information we have a lot of examples of where it's leading us down. But if you think about the use of technology and the use, we always had bad stuff. We always had porn on the internet. We always, if you really want to make a bomb, you can get it on the internet. It's not impossible to get that information. It is possible. So for me, I'm positive about it, and I can just see the potential with the one-to-one teaching component. If we build models upon the existing technology, to have someone use it as a klankbord, where you can talk to it, you can mentor it, mentoring, and it can help you. I had a master's class where we had about 40 students in the class, and we had to do research questions. And I said, take ChatGPT and give the questions to it, your research questions, and interact and for them, it was amazing, the positive experience. So for me, I see there's a lot of positive that we can, but I do agree with what you're saying. There are some other challenges that might also be prohibiting.
We touched a bit on ChatGPT. There's a question, someone asking here, it would be interesting to hear the thoughts of the panel regarding ChatGPT. I think we touched on it quite a bit, but perhaps, of course, do you want to touch on anything else in addition to comments already made about ChatGPT?
Yeah, language models are just like, there's many of them. ChatGPT was just the one, I think, that caught the public's imagination.
What do you think it did?
There's a couple of things here. So one is using the chat interface. Language models have been something that's been built over a period of time. If you use translation services, as translation services were getting better, those were language models that were behind there. You would have seen things like autocomplete on your email getting better and better. Those are language models. But at the same time, it betrays something. So the reason of using the chat interface, it also makes people think that you're really talking to a person. And as such, you then give it more respect than it should get, right? So these models can be very confidently wrong. So you can ask and they will respond, and then respond with literally nonsense kind of on there. So we have to then be careful within there. So in the same ways that now you had to teach how to use a calculator, right? There's garbage in, garbage out. Now you have to teach people on saying like, no, here's these models, they're here, here's good ways to use them. And then here's how you then can use them to enhance your learning. It is not something that's automatic. Like people think like, oh, I'll just chat to it and then I will learn. That is not. You actually have to be seeking the learning and then being able to then ask the questions in the right way so that you can actually see. So one might be, please help me improve my writing. It is not just simply improve writing of my little paragraph. It would be, can you tell me where in the paragraph I had made mistakes and why? Right, that's a better kind of thing. And that's more than that gives you an opportunity to then see that feedback. But then there's a high likelihood that people are just going to be, no, I just need to do the simplest thing, please write this for me, and then I move on. And that then removes completely, again, you could say, oh, we're closing the digital divide because now people have this tool. But if people don't know that it actually opens up this whole world of possibilities, and those are not actually explored, then we just leave that on the table. It is not something that you take with you. It is something that just actually, for the people who know, they can further move even higher. And for the people who don't, they get left behind, as I think Wesley was saying. It's like, with these revolutions, you have to be very careful. They might happen, but then there can be a whole set of our society that just gets left behind.
Perhaps, Professor Rosalind Smith, if you can speak to this question, please, about how... First, they ask, what is the ratio of AI users to non-users? The secondary part of that question is this going to benefit governments, producers, and workers equally, in your view?
Okay, so the first part of the question, I don't have an answer. Because do you know the ratio?
Oh, no, it's 100%.
100%.
Everybody touches AI. If you are on the internet and you just open up a web browser, there is some system somewhere that is calculating what it's supposed to show you. And even if you don't have a social media account, it doesn't matter. You are being tracked, and through that, there's a lot of AI that is just used to try and figure out what to show you on the internet. So it's that's why I say in these examples of you are already part machine. If for a lot of you using the internet, you're part machine. If the internet stopped working tomorrow, you would go through withdrawal symptoms.
True.
Yeah.
Right, you will go with it because your brain has already gotten used to, there is this thing that I interact with, and it gives me access to specific types of capabilities. And a lot of that is automated. So as soon as, if that's switched off, literally we're worried about load shedding and everything like that. But seriously, if our internet connections switched off, I'm pretty sure within probably 3 hours, South Africa would go into a frenzy. Because people will just be refresh, what's going on? Yeah. So that's 100% people, everybody is in some way or another using AI.
Equal benefit?
Equal benefit, I think that everyone's kind of touched on that already. No, it's going to be very difficult to get to a point where everyone equally benefits from this technology, especially on this continent. We have to actively engage and ensure that we can ensure that more people have access to these benefits, understand this technology. We have to increase the digital literacy of our population, make it more accessible. All these things have to be played. And if we don't, or if we're not, proactive enough in dealing with this, it's going to exacerbate the problems we already have. So it's going to further unemployment. It's going to further the inequalities and the Gini coefficients that we're experiencing already. So we're already seeing situations where we are outputting certain graduates from our universities with the skills that are highly sought after in this field, but because there's no jobs for those people, they're leaving the continent. And vice versa, there are areas where there are jobs already for those, but we're not able to pay enough to keep them here. So yeah, I think we have to understand this, and we have to actively engage with it. And I think that's very much where the future of work, the Center for the Future of Work, is placed to try and understand. But like we all know, this is moving at a rapid pace.
Another here, lengthy question, but they say in a country like ours, South Africa, where we have problems of unemployment, potholes, shortage of drinking water in rural areas, shortage of equipment in hospitals, is it a good idea or a right move for a country such as ours to start investing or focusing in AI instead of focusing on the current problems that have already been mentioned above? Dr. Jantjies, the issue of competing priorities.
I think the conversation around AI needs to consider the fact that there's been continuous development of research within computer sciences, within a generative AI. So it's not a new topic. So it just so happens that ChatGPT came out, it was in everybody's hands, and there was a very strong focus to be saying, should we be doing something within this area, especially for maybe SMMEs who were not using generative AI effectively. It became in the hands of young kids doing homeworks with it, and many other use cases that you can think about. But it's very important that we do have an investment within the area. If you are not making plans, someone is making plans on your behalf. We can't, as a country, leave the work that comes when it comes to products, when it comes to R&D, when it comes to innovation with AI to other countries. So many of the multinational organizations, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Google, or whether it's the ones that you interact with on a regular basis, Microsoft, have got very strong R&D teams within their companies that heavily invest on this. So we are consumers already, right? So we are using that technology. There will come a time if we have no focus within this area whereby we'll be completely affected by the decisions that have been taken by these companies on our behalf. And we're seeing the impacts of this in other areas where some of this technology has been used. There's been ethical challenges related to it. A simple one of facial recognition where the training data doesn't have a lot of black and brown people, and in some cases, if it's used for a justice system, wrong decisions can be made because it was a poor facial recognition detection model that was used. And there's great research by Dr. Joy that goes into this. So for us as a continent, it is quite important that we invest in this because it has a ripple effect on jobs. As he was talking on how businesses then transform, skills will transform. So we're not just doing research on AI, we're also thinking about how do we prepare the future fit workforce that is going to man the new economies that transform with the technologies that come out.
And the investment needn't necessarily only come from the fiscus, right? The investment should be coming from the private sector, who in many ways would be the biggest beneficiaries.
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, we've got a very strong pipeline, especially of data science that we have had over the years, and we're reaping the benefits of doing that, of having established a unit and a pipeline from partner trainers to bring this within the organization. And that wouldn't have happened if we didn't invest in the education that went there. And I mentioned that we go all the way from basic education all the way to higher education. And so for us to move the dial on innovation and the ecosystem as a whole in our economy, this requires public-private partnerships to have all stakeholders looking at this. And it's a fair question that the person asks, that we have so many other challenges. As an average South African, don't tell me about generative AI. Tell me about how does this put food on my table. And so it doesn't discard the fact that we have to look at this as a holistic perspective, end-to-end and not forgetting the fact that we need to ensure that this future fit workforce, all the technologies that we are developing within business to ensure your personalized experiences, the very same workforce needs to come and man and ensure the greater growth of our economy from the products.
Prof. Maravate?
Yeah, I think another thing people should maybe think about in this case is that not the other side. Yes, there's the nice part where the AI happens and it looks like magic, but it's on what the foundational things that need to be there for the AI to be useful. There's a lot of need for making sure that our data systems in the public and the private sectors in South Africa are very good. It doesn't really help if you don't know how many beds you have in hospitals, how many nurses actually are available at clinics today, and all that. And all of that requires data infrastructure, right? Meaning that you can count people, you know what's actually going on within a province, you know what's happening inside a municipality, you understand what's happening in agriculture, all those things. These require that the foundational work has been done. And you can see that those are things that are still missing. We went through COVID and we saw how a lot of these systems actually either didn't exist or were very weak. And we need to make sure that they work. You have people like Stats doing a lot with a little, but they need more support, right? They need to be able to do their work in a way that really gets us to count South Africans. It's a very broad concept. It's not just about the census. It's really about understanding who we are, how we can count, and then knowing that we can then make sure we can set our resources into the right places. And then once all of that is correct, it's much easier to add these other things on top. But at the moment, those things aren't there. So I'm almost like twisting around that question of saying that actually you need that because it needs to drive all these foundational things and making sure that they're there. If those foundational things aren't there, it just really falls apart in many, many different ways.
Could I just clarify that a bit even more, just to support that argument, is that a lot of the issues in that question that were highlighted, potholes, electricity, all those issues, what is causing those issues in our society? And look at the potential what AI has to resolve those causes. Increase education, make more efficient systems, reduce corruption. It has the potential to deal with those elements in our society, which are causing the inefficiencies that are resulting in these things that we see. So we shouldn't be too short-sighted and say that AI is not a priority, because then we're just simply looking at the symptoms that are taking place. We have to get at the root cause, and this technology has the potential to do that.
Now the question here reads, because of the fact that AI is dependent on algorithms created by programmers, ethically, wouldn't we have a situation whereby AI-facilitated decisions would have a bias towards the creators of the enabling algorithms? And a directed question to Prof. Ndemerwa.
Yes, definitely. I spoke about data bias. There will definitely be, and we have a lot of conversation currently that you have, if you read a little bit more about this topic, is the bias that is currently with regards to it. So yes, the answer is yes, there's definitely some bias. And training the models in different ways will be an enormous task to ensure that it's all inclusive.
So it's about who the programmers are.
It's about who owns the models.
Prof. Rosalind Smith, this one's for you. What role does industry have in pushing new technologies onto the market, more specifically the application of AI or machine learning in relation to digital twins?
Wow, okay. So digital twins is a phenomenal, exciting initiative. And this really speaks to the possibilities in terms of integrating AI or our world of data into the real world. So just to give you a little bit of background, UP is currently working on its own digital twin city, which will encompass Hatfield, and it'll be quite a comprehensive digital twin of this environment, bringing in data from traffic, learners, building environments, all of these facets, and pulling it in so that we can observe this in a digital format. With that, it presents a huge amount of spin-offs in terms of business. You know, we can simulate certain environments more effectively. We can look at certain situations. We can forecast and do prescriptive analytics based on that data. So what can industry do in terms of these new technologies? Invest, support them right now. Once we've got the capability here on the continent, in the country, then we can start leveraging off that. But it takes investment to get this all going.
Another here, do we have, there we go. Do we have means to measure and quantify the possible impact on the welfare of a nation? Let me also just pick up the next one as well, which is, again, focusing on regulation, and they're directing this one to Professor Marivate, who, and this person asks, does SA have any regulating body or advisory council or similar structure to consider the impact of these technologies and to advise policy makers thoroughly? Perhaps, Prof. Marivate, if you can respond to that question. And then the previous one about the welfare of a nation, perhaps all our panelists could then just think about your parting shot as well in answering that about, how we define progress, how really we see successful nations as we think about the impact of AI. But Prof. Marivate, just on the advisory council or similar structure.
Yeah, so I think a lot, a huge part of society at the moment is trying to grapple with this, because it's become now very clear of like, okay, we have these technologies, and now maybe because of these language models, they're here, and now we have to grapple with them as quickly as we can. There's a lot of NGOs, private sector and public sector, that are trying to understand the implications. And that maybe might look like it's very self-driven, but and on one part, it's a positive development. I think I'm speaking at the South African Human Rights Commission on Friday. I don't know what's next week, where I'm speaking also as well. And then mostly going there as a researcher to explain what the technologies are. For me, I don't feel that it's worthwhile to keep them looking like they're magic. We work to demystify, and then from there work towards joint understanding. And then that equips the decision makers with now moving forward to say, okay, fine, if we're thinking about regulation, what is it actually that we're regulating? If we're thinking about new policies, what are the new policies? If we don't demystify, it then just becomes this thing of we're just creating wishy-washy policy that is not actually connected with anything kind of at all. So even going back to the 4IR, the President's Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution and some of these other things, there had been work that has been going on building up these other soft infrastructures within there. It's just that now we're then having to play this half catch up to maybe some reactions that are happening in the EU. And we still need to ask ourselves, for us as South Africa, for us as the continent, what are our priorities? What are our values? And how do we put these down and then say this is what we're going to take as a minimum? And if we don't do that, as Maki said, it just becomes a thing of somebody told us that this is what we're supposed to do. And then it becomes something where later on you go like, but this doesn't make any sense for us within there. There's lots of challenges that have to do with copyright, with the right to research. We've hosted at the University of Pretoria a conference that looked at right to research in the age of data. Like, what is it that really we should have access to? At the same time, in terms of the beneficiation, which rights do people actually have? And these are very different to if you're going to the EU or to the US, where you have fair use being seen in a specific way that is very different to what we see on there. Some people might want to say, I want to preserve my language in such a way that if anybody wants to work on AI in my language, they must involve people from our community to be working within there. And that might be the thing that works for them. Right, so all these then require this policy making that's much more dynamic than just using a system where in some of those places people don't really worry about some of the things we do. Yeah.
Prof. Wesley, on the welfare of a nation.
Okay, so the question, the impact. I think impact is going to be difficult to measure at this stage because of just how this technology has deployed itself across so many industries, in so many processes, so fast. We know it's going to be extensive. So in terms of a measuring tool, I'm uncertain in terms of how we're going to measure that. But in terms of the welfare of a nation, it's going to be critical. It's going to lead to a huge comparative advantage for countries. So either if you can harness the skill or not is where the jobs are going to be created. So if Africa doesn't find itself hospitable for the development of these sort of tools and aligns itself with this technology, it's going to lose out.
Prof. Alta?
I'm not going to speak about the welfare. I can just say that as I said, I'm positive about the fact that we have this new technology. We have had AI for a very long time. I believe that it is going to have a positive impact. I believe that it is going to enhance our ability to do system thinking and to think about stuff more on a higher level. So currently, if we think about programming, if you want to do a bubble sort, you can ask OpenAI to generate the little piece of program that's going to write the bubble sort. But now it's not going to be anymore about writing it. Now it's going to be about how am I going to put this into the context of a system? How am I going to roll this out? How am I going to use it? So for me, I think I just see the potential. I think there's an enormous potential, and I think we haven't seen anything yet.
That's very exciting. And feel your enthusiasm. It's great. Dr. Jantjies, and the final word from you as well. Perhaps touch a bit on the impact of AI and the welfare and the progress of the nation as well, and just a parting shot as well.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Wesley that the immediate impact, we probably won't be able to measure it. I think we've had really great conversations about the impact that we're already seeing within business in terms of efficiencies and potential for economic growth. We're seeing in sectors on improving, for example, education. But the reality is that we can almost predict the welfare. We can almost predict the impact. As much as we can't measure it at this moment, we can predict the impact. And the prediction is that if we don't ensure partnerships across board, and if we don't ensure that the levers that are necessary for us to be critical enablers within that environment, it leaves us catching up one more time. So I think it's quite important that as we were talking today, we continue conversations and ensure cross-collaborative partnerships that have us having a common goal and vision, not just as a country, but as a continent.
Brilliant. Professor Rosalind Smith, Dr. Jantjies, Professor van der Merwe and Professor Marivate, thank you very much for your time and your fantastic contributions to this evening's discussion. And thank you to you for watching online and joining in on the conversation and the many, many fantastic questions that came through this evening as well. We do ask, of course, that you keep a lookout on all UP social media platforms as well as your email inbox for updates on the next LeadUP Alumni Thought Leadership Conversation, which is set to take place in August of 2023. So certainly do look out for that one. Once again, today's event was brought to you by the University of Pretoria's Alumni Relations team. Thank you very much for joining us. I am Sebenzile Nkambule. Good evening.
There are some places that will always be home. From the moment you took your first step onto the University of Pretoria's campuses, you've been part of our family. You've made friends, had a good time, fallen in and out of love, passed tests, failed some dismally, and started businesses. You had some great ideas. All the while, you made memories and learnt a lot. But in the end, you walked out of our gates a well-rounded person, someone committed to excellence. You still get things done the right way the first time. You've learned the value of innovation, mentoring, having a positive impact, and living a life based on strong morals, ethics, hard work, and responsibility. At the University of Pretoria, we're proud to call you part of our family. We're proud to be your alma mater, and we'd be delighted if you wanted to choose UP again to further your studies. Because even though we're the largest residential research university in South Africa, we're still your home. One thing we've learned over more than a century is that excellence is forever. We're still adamant in the high quality of our teaching and learning, and in the graduates that we produce. The more things change, the more they stay the same. UP will always be the home of Tux alumni.